Small people. Inch by inch, little snail, creep up and up Mount Fuji. And it's kind of an epigraph because there's a dash and it says Issa, 19th century haiku poet. Quote, a Navajo woman identifies 801 specimens of desert insects. And that quote is attributed to an American scientist, recorded 1948. 3 million abandoned children in big Brazilian cities. 3 million soldiers in red China. A Pennsylvanian sea lily fossil, 300 million years old, from the Santa Fe Basin, now paperweight on my desk. I want to be a lightning bug for the coming 300 million light years dark age. Wow, I love that. Okay, Erica, anything you want to say about this Sakaki poem? It is beat in a way. You might want to comment on its beatness or anything.
It's a stunning poem, and I'm really interested in how tightly constructed the poem is, which is an interesting thing in Beat Week, where we're, with Ginsberg and spontaneous prose, we're getting a lot of lines that are just expansive, and this feels very Williams or Creeley-ish in how intentionally the stanzas and the line breaks are working to further amplify what the language in the poem actually is. And it's so beautiful the way that the poem kind of puts us in our place, which is another interesting contrast to the largeness of the eye that we get in a lot of the beat writers.
So does it have any relation to the beats? I mean, you've really described it as a very distinct thing.
Yeah, of course. I think it has a relation to the beats because it's, I don't mean this to be a cop out, but Creeley is this week. So I'm for whatever reason, I'm thinking of I Know a Man as I'm reading this, although the content of the two poems are very, very different. But there's something going on that's very sound focused and also very focused on, activism and kind of drawing attention to change that needs to happen.
There's also a beat. We'll turn to Allie Castleman in a second. There's also a beat sideshow. That's the wrong word. There's a bend in the river when you get to Gary Snyder and Joanne Kiger and Philip Whalen and Nanao Sakaki. They're interested in making sure that they visit Japan and actually take Buddhism seriously. They're interested in looking from California further west rather than east. Meanwhile, the other beats are going east-west, 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 New York, San Francisco, and that group was looking in a different tradition. In fact, this relates to the question that prompts that Laney's going to give us a little later. Fantastic. Okay, and that's something that ModPo should be exploring. It's not just the ecstatic long line beat, but there's a different beat. And I think Ferlinghetti, not a poet I really admire that much, but Ferlinghetti does sometimes what Sakaki does at the end, this little trick. I want to be a lightning bug for the coming 300 million. It's kind of jokey in the sense. It turns that 300 million into light years dark age. Allie Castleman, thoughts on this Sakaki poem in ModPo Plus?
Yeah, I mean, talk about the darkness surrounds us.
Nice.
I think there's a really lovely build to the kind of like stakes in this poem. So you get this kind of, I'm also just interested in the kind of like found language element that begins. Yeah. The first two stanzas, or I guess you could see one of them as being an epigraph. But I think with the first stanza, inch by inch, little snail, creep up and up Mount Fuji, it kind of brings to mind this like Sisyphusian struggle.
Yeah.
And yet by the end, there's just this like delight in getting to defy that.
Yes.
And it's almost like a celebration of the surrounding darkness just because it provides the opportunity to be that tiny infinitesimal like little lightning bug.
Nice. That's great, Allie. Thank you. Dave Poplar, a brief comment on this, and then we'll turn to Kate.
One thing I just it strikes me about this poem is just sort of a stylistic thing, and how expertly this starts from 100,000 feet above such a broad scope, and it's so broad it almost seems timeless and universal, and it's subjective, and then it becomes immediately narrow and immediate and subjective and almost quotidian with the line, "Now paperweight on my desk." I just love how that just funnels everything to a super narrow immediate point, and then the next thing it just goes back out to a broad scope again. So I just really like the way that poem does that.
Nice. That is in some slight way the metapoetic turn, because we realize he's at a writing desk with the paperweight. All right. That's very cool. Kate, your thought on this?
I'm struck in this poem by its contrast with Ginsberg and Kerouac, who drew from the Whitmanian tradition that extended on to Charles Olson, who comes up in the Baraka work. Just the inclusiveness, the like panned out wide scale, drawing in, throwing in everything into the pan, or their sort of attempts to do that in these big, expansive, inclusive, long-lined poems. And here we're seeing this contrasting attempt to gesture at scale and like history and time, but in this very, concise, pared down way that does remind me a lot of Creeley, but also, puts me in mind of Ray Armantrout and some of her sort of collaged, not minimalist, but very, they are minimal to a degree, poems.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about is time.
I love that. That's great. Yes, scale is a big issue. Dan has a comment on this, and then we're going to go to the phone.
Dan says the repeat of the 3 million gradually makes these huge numbers seem accessible. Also, a lightning bug is a light that goes on and off.
Dan, you're unbelievable. That's totally right.